Alright guys, welcome back. We are doing this puzzle streak. In the last video session, I started this puzzle streak. We've gotten up to the 44th puzzle, which is the closest we've been to 50. Really trying to make it to 50 because my reasoning is, the average chess game probably goes for less than 50 moves. Maybe 35, 45 moves. Of course, some of them go for 75 or 100 moves if it's a marathon game or more. But in general, if you can play 50 accurate moves in a row, you're pretty likely to win a lot of games. So that's my reasoning here, is to become consistent with 50 correct puzzles in a row. This is the first time I've been really close to 50. This is the 44th puzzle. I'm continuing the streak because I haven't broken it yet. I only stopped because of time constraints yesterday. So now let's continue on. Now this is the 44th puzzle. And it's an endgame, which is great because the difficulties involved in gaining a substantial advantage in the opening and middle game are very present in a lot of competitive chess. And so getting into an end game is a common occurrence where all the pieces have been traded off and things seem relatively equal, like here where we each have 4 pawns. The question is it equal? And obviously here it's not equal. Black is a lot better, but I only know that because this is a puzzle where it's asking me to play as black. If I were in this position in a tournament game, it might not be so clear, because at first it isn't so clear. But if we start to calculate, then things may become so. And we do calculate in a very methodical way, starting with checks. The first check here would be g5. I'm not drawing arrows in this example because it's important to try as much as possible and emulate competition variables and conditions. And in the competition, you don't draw arrows. So try and follow along with me here. The pawn there, my furthest back most pawn, g7. If I push that one forward 2 squares and give a check on g5, I think in response to that, white's going to have to capture the pawn with his h-pawn. Because if he doesn't, if he just moves his king instead, doesn't really matter where he moves the king. But if he does move the king, then I'm going to take his h-pawn, and that pawn, which is currently a backwards pawn on g7, is suddenly going to be an outside passed pawn on h4. And that's going to distract him a lot. While he goes to take my pawn on h4, I'm going to take his e4 pawn. And then in the time it takes him to come back and take my f6 pawn, I'll be able to go and take a3 and b4, and then promote my a pawn out on the right-hand side wing. So I think after g5, he's going to have to play h takes g5. Then I can play f takes g5 check again. And for similar reasoning, I think he has to take that pawn, stepping his king onto g5, at which point I would step my king up to e5, essentially taking the opposition, meaning that our kings are an odd number of squares apart, or basically they're on the same colored square, they're both on dark squares, g5 and e5, and it's my opponent's turn to move, and there's no other moves he can do, so he has to move his king away. Of course, he can move on to the h file, but he probably wants to stay as close to the action as possible, and that really means either g6 or g4, and in either case, I then play king takes e4. And then, from that point in time, the question is, can I go over and take the a3 pawn and the b4 pawn and promote my a pawn before he can do anything? So let's see. If I take on e4, let's say he plays king g6 in that position, and I take on e4. Then he plays king f6. Then I go king d4. Then he goes king e6. And then I go king c4. He goes king d6. I go king b3. He goes king c5. And I take on a3. He takes on b5. And then I play king b3, opening up the pathway for my a4 pawn. He tries to move out of the way of his own pawn by playing, let's say, king c6. Sorry, king c5. I start pushing a3. He goes b5, a2, b6, a1 queen, b7. Well, then I can just bring my queen down to a7, prevent him from getting a queen. I think that's winning. I don't think there's anything he can do about that. There might even be a potentially better way to do things, but I think that was winning in and of itself. So he's instead moved the king, and this is what I said initially, that I think if he just moves the king, I can take this, and the time it takes him to take, this same issue applies for him. So we just take. That's still winning. We're up to the 45th puzzle now. And in this puzzle, we're looking for checks first and foremost. And there is queen takes g7 check. But after king takes queen, I don't see a follow-up there for us. So I don't love that. There is also rook f8 check, but then rook takes rook. I don't see a follow-up. So I don't see any other checks available at all. So we can look at other captures now, and one capture that is available is rook takes h6. Rook takes h6. He can't recapture the rook because that pawn in front of his king, the g7 pawn, is pinned by my queen. So I could play rook takes h6, but I'm still not really threatening anything there. I have won a pawn though, so it's good. But let's just say I win that pawn and then throw the move back to him. What can he do? At the very least, he can win a pawn back by playing queen takes c3. That's at the very least. And then I could maybe win another pawn with rook takes d6. But then he starts pushing his outside pass pawn with a3. And I really need to make something happen quick. So if I then play, say, rook d7, looking to mate him on g7, well, that could actually be pretty good. That actually could be pretty good. He can't advance the g-pawn because it doesn't have the help of the h-pawn, given that we've taken the h-pawn on the first proposed move. So if he does advance it, we simply take it with the queen, give a check, and when the king moves to either f8 or h8, we slam in with our queen on the g7 square and mate him shortly thereafter. So what would he do there after this variation? So rook takes h6, queen takes c3, rook takes d6, a3, rook to d7. I think that would be very good for us. Very good for us indeed. Therefore, after rook takes h6, I'm not afraid of queen takes c3 because of the aforementioned rook takes d6. And then I just don't see what he can do that's so scary. So after I take on h6, what else can he do? He can give a check either on a1 or c1. I can move my king to h2. And if he tries to continue on with a3, again, in either of those cases, we can take on d6 and things are looking really good. If I take on h6 and he, instead of taking a pawn or giving a check, let's say he improves perhaps the position of his rook and puts his rook on the f-file. So let's say rook takes h6, rook f8. Now what am I doing with my rook? Well, I could put it perhaps on g6. Let's say he plays rook f7, and I play h5, trying to put pressure on that g7 pawn. I think now he probably feels a bit of pressure. So in all these scenarios, I feel like white is better. The question is, which one of these scenarios is the winning idea? Because they can't all be winning. Well, they can sometimes all be winning, but in these puzzles, they rarely are. All right, so let's park the idea. I don't mind at all the idea of playing rook takes h6 at the moment, because I don't see what's so bad about it. I think, that was a decent defensive idea there for him to play rook f8 and cut my rook back off, whilst also keeping his queen protecting the d6 square. But even after rook g6, putting pressure on the g7 square, rook f7 defending it, h5 threatening h6, he could probably play something like, after h5, d5. But I don't have to respond to d5, I can play h6 anyway. Then he plays queen e7, defending the g7 square once more. But then let's say h takes g7. Yeah, no, I actually wouldn't really like that very much. I wouldn't really like that very much. He ends up being able to defend the g7 square. And I don't feel that I've really gained a whole lot. With all that said, if there's no checks and captures that I'm particularly fond of, and I'm not fond of queen takes e5 or rook takes d6, now I have to look at threats, and there's no way for me to directly threaten the queen. But I think the most threatening move that I can play, perhaps, is rook e6, which looks very innocuous. Rook e6, just moving the rook one square to the left. And if you're following along with this, I hope that, this is challenging but also mentally quite rewarding and stimulating, having to imagine these moves and use your brain. Use your brain. This is training. We're trying to create a training environment in which we improve at the skill of visualization and, being able to conceive in our imaginations these movements of the pieces and their relationships to each other. So not having arrows actually hopefully is quite helpful, but just imagine rook e6, putting that rook one square to the left onto the light square, rook e6. The reason I say that might be a good move is because I'm not afraid of queen a1 check or queen c1 check. I just play queen h2. And then even if he plays a3 or captures, my pawn on c3, I don't really mind, because my whole idea is I'm prepared then to play rook e7. And if I play rook e7, that's putting a lot of pressure on that g7 pawn. If I do that immediately, though, that g7 pawn can now move. Or can it? Because if it moves to g6, I still take it with the queen and we're going to mate. And if it moves to g5, I can't take it with the queen, but I can take it with my h-pawn. And if he takes back with his h-pawn, well, then I take with the queen and we're going to mate. So if I go through that again, rook e6, let's just say queen takes c3, rook e7, g5, h takes g5. He can't take. So what if he then plays h5 himself? Well, I suppose in that case I can play my queen to h3, where I'm threatening to capture on h5, and I'm also threatening to bring my queen in via the e6 square with a check. So I really quite like these ideas. But this idea of rook e6, it really revolves around the next move of playing rook e7. So if I play rook e6, what if he just plays d5? Because d5 would open up his queen's defense of e7, and therefore my idea of getting my rook to e7 is nullified. I suppose there, if he does in fact play d5, at the very least, I can take d5, and when he takes back, I can take e5 with my queen. And that might be good for me. It seems like it's not a bad idea. But I'm not convinced, and this is a difficult puzzle. It's the 45th puzzle, so I don't want to get it wrong. So I am going to take more time on it and see if there's any other threats I can come up with. How about the move Queen G6? Queen G6 threatens Queen F7 check, which would force King H7 or King H8. If King H7, then I would have Rook G6. But after he only has to ever play there Rook G7 and is defending himself. So I don't really think that Queen G6 produces big threats. Queen G6, I don't see really the big threat associated there. How about Queen G4? Queen G4 makes the threat of Queen E6 check. And Queen E6 check again forces that king to either H7 or H8. But in either circumstance, I don't then see the way to proceed. So this is quite difficult, and I've not yet seen anything better than Rook takes H6, which is at least it wins a pawn. At least it wins a pawn. I'm not very concerned about anything he can do with his queen there. Either of the checks there on A1, I just play King H2, or on C1, I play King H2. If he then captures my C3 pawn, I don't care because I then capture his D6 pawn. And I'm not afraid of his A pawn running away and becoming a queen because I play there. I play Rook D7, and I think that's putting an insurmountable amount of pressure on his G7 pawn and on his king behind it. So if Rook takes H6, I'm actually not afraid of the queen moves. I'm more wondering what I do after something like Rook F7, or even after D5. D5. So this is not clear to me, basically. What else could I do? There's other threats perhaps in the position. Like what if I change my mind altogether and play something like D4? D4 threatening to take on E5 twice. Leave myself with a poor pawn position. I don't think so. D4, he plays queen takes C3. And then even if I take on E5, he can simply take back, and I haven't won a pawn at all. So I don't like D4. It's a very difficult sort of position for me to work this out. Perhaps after Rook takes H6, I can then bring in my other sort of half idea of Queen G6. So let's say Rook takes H6, and for argument's sake, D5, Queen G6. My threat there is to play probably either Queen H7 check and then Queen F5 check, Maybe. Or is it to play after rook takes h6, he does something, queen g6, am I threatening rook h7? I still don't think so, because if things he's done in the meantime are like d5 and queen e7, he's defending the g7 square. So after rook takes h6, let's say d5, or rook f8, queen g6, then he could play, if I do go for if he had played queen f8, he could play queen f6. Sorry, rook f8, he could play rook f6. Although then I have queen e8, forcing his rook back. Then I could play queen e6. It just doesn't really feel like it's getting anywhere. That's the problem. It doesn't really feel like I'm making massive progress after rook h6. Rook takes h6. I think d5 is a pretty nice move for him. And the problem is I can't really move my queen without losing the rook. But I could just take on the d6 square. Sorry, on the d5 square. After rook takes h6, d5, I could play e takes d5. And he can just capture back. My problem is I can't then play queen takes e5 because he would take my rook on h6. And if I try and play something like queen g4 to move my queen out onto the light squares with check, say for instance queen g4 and then queen e6 check, A, I'm not really getting anywhere, I don't think, and B, after queen g4, he could just play queen b3 himself, taking that diagonal and preparing to run his a-pawn, although in that case he's abandoned the d6 square. So maybe after queen g4, queen b3, I could play rook takes d6. And then after, say, a3, I have this rook d7 idea, but because I haven't taken on h6 yet, he can play g4. And after I capture g4, he plays h5. And maybe there I can go like queen f2 or 3. But he plays rook f8 there. Wait, I wouldn't have to play queen f2 or 3 if I'm calculating this line with my queen already on the g4 square. And he's got his queen on the b3 square. Then the moment he plays h5, I can immediately swing in with queen takes h5. At which point I'm threatening basically to be able to mate him. As you can see, I'm really struggling here, but let's struggle through. This is how you grow. You push against a tough resistance. So what I'm thinking of is queen g4. My threat is to play queen e6 check, forcing him into the corner. And then to play, well, then I don't really have a threat after that. That's my problem. What if I just immediately play rook g6? And I'm not sure why I haven't thought about this earlier, but if I just immediately play rook g6, threatening the g7 pawn, he can't bring the rook there, he can't bring the queen there. So after rook g6, he can give a check or take my pawn. I move my king or lose the pawn. But then I play rook takes g7 check. He has to move the king somewhere along the 8th rank. And then I can play perhaps queen g6 or queen g4 and get my queen to the 7th rank before he's going to know what's hit him. I think that might be the move. It's been a long struggle, and it's taken a lot of time. And in a game, maybe taking this amount of time would mean my clock has run out. But first things first, we've got to learn how to be accurate and calculate things properly and get the correct moves. And then we can learn to speed things up later on once we're better at it. But you've got to learn to crawl before you walk, in most cases. And you've got to learn to walk before you can run, in all cases. So, this idea, rook g6. Let's say he plays d5. I go rook takes g7 check. And let's say he goes king h8. Well, if he goes king h8, then I'm going queen g6. And I'm going to mate him with queen h7 on the next move, unstoppably. He can maybe insert his checks there and I move my king around, but that's going to be all she wrote. So rook g6, d5 fails. I'm pretty sure it fails. Or after d5 and rook takes g7, if he goes the other way, let's say king f7, and I go queen g6. He could then play queen e7. But remember, my rook is on the 7th rank, and my rook would simply capture the queen. I don't see a better move, so I'm going to try it. We've spent a lot of time on it. If this isn't it, then I'm wrong. Let's just give it a go. It's correct. Now I'm going to take. And after the check, I'm just going to move. The next thing is my queen was going to come up to here, and then mate him over here unstoppably. So we got there in the end. It was tough, but we got there. Hopefully it was a growth experience. What we want to do now is continue on calculating accurately. We've only got a few more puzzles to hit the 50 mark. Let's start with the checks. We've got queen f3 check. I would imagine queen takes us, and then we can recapture with our knight, which hits his rook. We've got a lovely looking knight there, but the rook's going to move down to g4, attacking the pawn that we have there. And then we could play f5, hitting his rook and defending our pawn at the same time. We have a really nice looking knight. And in fact, after the queen f3 check, if he takes with his queen, we take with our knight. If he brings that rook down to anywhere really, let's say g4, I could play rook c1 check. And that, for all intents and purposes, forces his king to g2. But then I have rook g1 checkmate. So that's nice. So I think he actually also, after queen f3, he has to take the queen. Because if he moves the king, which is one option, well, maybe he doesn't have to, but I thought if he moves the king, at the very least I can take his queen, and when he takes back, I can play rook c2 check, which is okay, I think. But now looking at some other options, so I've looked at the check. There's no other checks. The capture, the only captures is queen takes f2, but he takes, and there's nothing gained, or knight takes h3. After he takes that, we could play rook c3. But at the very least, he can take that as well. And once we take his queen, we've only got a queen versus two rooks. He's got two outside pass pawns. I don't love that position at all. So I don't like any of the checks or captures necessarily. So what about threats? How about immediately rook c3? Rook c3 immediately threatens his queen. And if his queen moves off the 3rd rank, then we can play rook takes h3 check, forcing the king to g2 and allowing queen f3 check. And only he can move his king to f1. At which point, admittedly, it's hard to come up with something. Unless, maybe in that circumstance we would have queen d3 check, forking the king and the rook on b5. But he will likely, after rook c3, for those reasons, position his queen on a light square. So let's say he goes to queen e2, that light square. Now, we cannot play queen f3 check. We can, and if we do play rook takes h3 check and he comes king g2, we don't have much more recourse after that. So again, unsurprisingly, bit of a difficult scenario here to try and tease out. What if we play knight f3 immediately? Knight f3 immediately, quite a nice idea because we're attacking the rook. If the rook moves off the first rank, for instance, if it moves downward, almost doesn't matter where, but if it moves downward, we can't yet play rook c1 because his queen is still there defending the square. So actually, let me go back and calculate that check one more time. Queen f3 check. If he moves the king away to the only square it could move, then I can play queen takes h3 check, but he uses his queen to recapture, and after I capture his queen, he takes my knight, and I'm losing. If after the check and he moves, I instead play queen takes queen, that would be probably pretty good, because after queen takes queen, pawn takes queen, knight f3 check, he moves the king, knight takes g1, he takes on g1. And in that scenario, he still has these outside passed pawns, the A pawn and the B pawn. So I don't like that so much. Even if I would just win that exchange, well, I've equalized material, but positionally, his outside passed pawns are monsters. So I really don't necessarily love that. After the check, he moves this king one step down. What do I really do? Can I then play rook c3, attacking his queen? If he takes my queen in that position, then I can take back with my rook, but then he goes rook g3. I would have rook takes f2 check. He plays king g1. I'm down material. He's got these outside passed pawns. I'm not really liking any of these scenarios. Really not liking these scenarios. So let's change tack here. What if we play queen f5? I haven't liked the checks or captures. I haven't liked the first threat I looked at, which was rook c3, threatening the queen. What about the idea of queen f5? I thought that I might be threatening queen h3 check, but no, his queen is there defending, so this is really getting annoyingly difficult. How do we do this? How do we do this? Maybe let's go back to this other threat. Rook c3, attacking that queen. Does basically force a response from him. And I think his best response there would probably be queen e2. After queen e2, what can I do then? Maybe then I can play queen f5, combining those ideas. Queen f5 there, he could play himself queen g4. But then I would have rook takes h3 check. He couldn't take the rook, but if he plays king g2, then he loses the queen. So that actually is looking good. So rook c3, queen e2, queen f5, threatening simply to take on h3, checkmate. That would actually be checkmate. If my queen could take on h3, it would be checkmate. And after rook c3, if he takes my rook, I take back. I've won a lot of material there, and I'm threatening to play queen h3 mate. So I've got to think that's probably the best I can do in the scenario. Or if he doesn't take my rook and he instead withdraws his queen, but still keeps an eye on the f3 pawn, which can only really be done from queen e2, then I play queen f5 rather than f3. And from f5, I'm again threatening this idea of mate in one. He can't defend it with his queen, but can he defend it with his rook by playing rook g3? Well, if he plays rook g3 there, then I can play rook takes rook, and after pawn takes rook, I can't quite play queen f1 because his queen on e2 protects that square. So I can't take the rooks, but maybe I can then play rook c1, check. And that king basically has to move, because if the rook moves back to block the check, then I do deliver the mate on h3. And if the queen moves back, well, I take the queen. So he basically has to move the king. And he would have to move it to g2 or perhaps h2. If he moves it to g2, then I just don't see the follow-up. I do not see the follow-up. But if I just take a step back, after rook c3, queen e2, queen f5, rook g3, rook takes g3, pawn takes g3, I can play queen h3 check, forcing king g1. Then there's knight f3 check, mate, except that he can sacrifice his queen for the knight. But after he does that, look, I think it's actually the best I can do. I'll draw the arrows out as well, but what I'm thinking is rook c3, I think he has to come here, because if he doesn't, if he goes somewhere else, like I've been saying, if in here, doesn't really matter. And also if he takes my rook, I'm happy to take back because the threat here still applies. So what I'm saying is after this, I think he has to come here. Then I can come here and I'm threatening checkmate. That would be checkmate. He can't block it with his queen. We've gone through that already. And he would have to block it like this to defend. But then if I take and he takes, I can still take here. It's not checkmate anymore because he can use this square. But then I can come here. And that is checkmate, except for the fact that he can sacrifice the queen for the knight. But after I take back, it's going to be mate and move after. So I think this is correct. I think this is the correct way to go. He takes, which I think is best, because now he still has the outside pawn, but that still gave me the best possibility of winning. So that, again, was really hard. We're up to the 47th. It was hard for me anyway. Let's continue on, though, because hopefully we're growing here. We're growing. That's the idea anyway. Now, in this position, we've got a check available. It's bishop takes h7 check. If bishop takes h7 check, we've got to assume he takes. And if he does, we can play queen h5 check. And that's actually nice, because after queen h5 check, doesn't matter if he moves the king back, or if he tries to block with the queen, Whatever he does, we then double back and capture his capture his bishop on e5, and in so doing, we've opened up his king side, won a pawn, and those things are all pretty nice. In general, though, we are 2 pawns down in this position. He's got a d pawn and an e pawn, and we have neither. So if we just win 1 pawn, we're still down a pawn. So we have to make sure that's really worthwhile. And I'm not sure that it is. Why would it be worthwhile simplifying into a position where we're down a pawn? So I don't think I love that check. Other checks, there are none. Captures, we could capture the bishop straight away with rook takes e5, but after queen takes e5, firstly, he's threatening queen e1 mate. Well, it wouldn't be mate, actually, because we could retreat our bishop. But I don't see the point of just giving up that exchange when we're already down a lot of material. Maybe we follow it up with bishop b2. And then, we've got some pressure on his king side with both of our bishops and our queen there, but with all the pawns he has there, he can probably just put pawns in the way of the diagonals and be okay with all the extra material he has. And that leads me to threats. So what about the threat, the idea of queen h5? That's an obvious threat. Queen h5 threatens checkmate by queen h7 checkmate. At the same time, it makes a secondary threat of queen takes e5 and winning a clean bishop. So after queen h5, he could just throw his own bishop away by queen h2 check. And we could just take that either with our king or queen, and we've won an exchange back, which is nice. And we're also still threatening this checkmate idea. So we'd have to deal with that in some way, shape, or form. Probably by playing g6 or h6. And then we would have at least re-established material equality. And on the following move, we can still follow up with this idea of bishop b2 and continue our attack against his king. So that's quite a very promising threat. Queen h5. Queen h5. Threatening mate. If he deals with the mate threat, he loses the bishop. If he deals with the bishop threat, he loses to mate. So the best he can do is, in fact, throw the bishop away on h2, giving us that bishop, which we can happily take. Let's say we take it with, I don't know, the queen or the king. If we take with the king, though, we might be giving him future options. So let's say we take with the queen. We've re-established material equality. What's he going to do there? That's the big question. He has to still deal with the mate threat. If he does that with, well, the only way to do that really is with his pawns. If he goes g6, we can also immediately play something like bishop h6 or queen h6, or, it just looks really good for us. I haven't calculated the rest of that, but it does look good for us. Let's see, is there any other sort of good threats that we have available here? I don't think so. I think by sort of a matter of principle, we sort of have to go with that move. It's got to be the best move. Do we want to take on h7? I think not, because after he takes, we've only won a pawn. Whereas this way we can win an exchange. Fingers crossed. It is in fact correct. He deals with the checkmate threat, but gives up the bishop. 48. We're really getting there now. Now, let's just follow the same principles. They should still apply, right? We could play queen f8 check, but he can capture that queen in a couple of ways. And I don't see any great follow-up to either of them. We don't have any other check available. We do have a couple of captures to consider. One is rook takes c6, just winning a pawn. Just winning a pawn. Doesn't seem super exciting for this type of a position to just win a pawn. The other is rook takes g6, and he can take that rook off the board with his queen, and I don't think we've gained anything. So that doesn't seem very exciting either. Which brings us really to threats already. Already brings us to threats. Wait, did I consider... I didn't consider the other check. The other check was rook e8 check, which I actually don't mind, because if he takes that rook, we can then play queen f7, threatening to capture the rook back, and also threatening, if the rook moves off the 8th rank, threatening mate on g8. But the rook would either just go back to d8, or maybe the queen would come back to d8, and everything would be defended. So, okay, I've considered it now. Don't really like it. So, what are we going to do here? That's kind of an important question. Other threats that we could employ might include bishop c2, threatening his queen. But the queen drops down a square to d2. Now we're very much kind of, in a very tactical situation. I was going to say sort of forced to take the queen, and then after he takes back, move our bishop and we'll gain nothing. But it's maybe not so simple. After bishop c2, attacking his queen, the queen drops down a square to d2, attacking both our queen and our bishop. We can actually then play the idea of rook e8 check. Because if his rook captures us, we take his queen and say thank you very much. So he can't capture us, he'd have to move the king. And after he moves the king, well, then it may well be the case that I can bring the bishop back to b3, sacrifice my queen, play bishop g7 check, forcing the king back to h8, and then moving the bishop back again with another check. That might be like a perpetual check. I'll show that one with arrows. I don't think this is the correct way to go, but after this and this, if I play check, he can't take because he loses the queen. So after the check, and there's no sense really in doing this because I still just take, probably with the queen in that case, and he's going to be in all sorts of trouble. So I think after this, he has to move the queen. He has to move the king after this check. And once he does that, my idea was, what if I actually just bring my bishop back to where it was before? Say, you can have my queen. Then I'm going to go check, forcing him back here. Then I move out the way, let's say here. Check. Now it's not a perpetual actually, because he simply takes the rook. So it's an interesting idea to have calculated, because maybe there would have been a mate here, but there's not, I don't think. I really don't think there is. Let's have another look at it. So bishop c2, he brings the queen down. I go rook e8 check. He moves the king to h7. And what if I then go queen f7? If I then go queen f7, he goes rook takes rook. I take rook, he takes bishop, and I'm just down a bishop. So no, I don't think that's it. Other threats, maybe I can play rook e3. Seems kind of like we're going in the wrong direction there. However, again, this is difficult. You know, I'm going to end up spending as long as I spent on the first 45 puzzles, on the final 5 puzzles, but they're difficult. They're really difficult. So what can I really do here? I could play, is there anything that's a threat? Not really a lot of big threats in the air that I can see. Maybe queen e1. Queen e1 could be a nice idea for me. Queen e1. That comes with a threat, I think. Because after queen e1, if he does nothing, then I go rook e8 check. He has to move to h7, essentially. He could also block with the bishop. But if he blocks with the bishop there, then I can play queen e5 check. So if after queen e1 and then rook e8, he plays rook e8, I go queen takes e8 check. Again, he does now have to move that king, and I will end up mating him there. So queen e1 actually comes with some nice threat there, but how does he deal with threat? That's the question. How does he deal with a threat? Let's say he plays... I don't know. Let's just say he plays queen d7. If he plays queen d7 there, well, I suppose there he's at least made a concession, moving his queen back out of my grill. I could play rook takes g6 there if I want. I could play queen e2, or queen e4. I could play rook e7 in that scenario. It seems like a good first step. Queen e1. He doesn't have any checks except sacrificing his queen for nothing. I'm not afraid of after queen e1. I'm not afraid of a4 attacking my bishop. And the reason I'm not afraid of it is because, again, I just go rook e8 check. And he can't take without getting mated. He can't move the king without allowing bishop g7 check, king h8. We're back to this kind of an idea. But this time after king h8, we could actually play bishop c4 check and win his queen. So queen e1's a pretty nasty move. Queen e1. Queen e1, what does he do? Oh, we're so close. I don't want to screw it up now, so I'm taking my time here. But after I play queen e1, what does he do? To prevent the threat of checking him on e8. Maybe he moves the king down straight away. Maybe he moves the king down straight away to h7. At the very least, I can then play queen takes a5. That's at the very least. Perhaps I could still play rook e8 in that scenario as well, because then I would still be threatening the combo of bishop g7 check, king h8, and bishop c4 check, winning the queen. So queen e1, king h7, still rook e8 is nice, because if he blocks with his bishop, I can still go queen e5, or in fact there, queen e6. I like it a lot. I'm not sure of it. This could be the end of the streak, but you have to make a move at some point, and I don't see anything better than queen e1. There we go. The streak is over. The streak is over. Let's try and at least understand why. What was wrong with Queen E1? I was saying things like, he can attack my bishop, but I don't care because I play things like this. Check. If he takes, I take back. Check. If he blocks, I take. If he moves here, thanks for playing. That's mate. So I wasn't afraid of that. I wasn't afraid of even if he played this, because then I would play at the very least check, forcing him here, and at the very least check, uncovering this check. Now, if he moves back, I take the queen. If he takes my rook, well, okay, I take again with check. Once he moves, then I take here. So I thought this was looking really nice to play this queen e1 idea. And I didn't really see a great response for him. Maybe he could play something like this, but I then thought that's a concession in and of itself. I could take this pawn if I want. I can take this pawn. I can even just play something like this. Things are looking relatively nice here for me, I would think. I think things are looking pretty nice here for me. I think it's a promising position. I didn't really consider this move as a big threat. What is the threat? I guess the threat is now check. And if he takes, I take back. And we're going to end up mating him. So it's maybe connected to the same idea. So we were along the right tracks, but clearly not right now. I would like to know what the computer would do after this move. Computer would play. So it's not like I've thrown the game away entirely. It's not like it's a -5 position. It's probably a draw. It's probably a drawn position here. So like in a practical realm, I haven't made such a big mistake that I would necessarily lose the Canberra Chess Club Championship, let's say, because I can still play on from here. And I think this is kind of difficult for black to come up with the best move. And, I've got a relatively comfortable position. But this move is so much better. Why? Why? Is it just that there's nothing he can do? It's saying this is the best move. Well, what would I do if he does this move, then this move comes to mind immediately. Because he can't do this because he would just lose immediately on the spot with checkmate. So, and if he takes, well, I'm not sure. Then I go check, he comes here. What have I gained? I can take this, and I'm threatening this on the next move. Perhaps that's it. What else could he have done? If he attacks my queen directly, I can then play this idea, pinning the rook so it can't take me. And if he then defends his own rook, I say, I don't care, I take it. He takes back. And again, we're dropping in here with a pretty unstoppable threat coming up. He finds a way to stop it while we still just go check. And if he comes here, well, then clearly we take. If he comes here, yeah, look. It's a shame. We got to 48. It took us well and truly over 2 hours, about 2.5 hours worth of this puzzle streak. It's pretty slow. But 48, the new record, the new target, the new PB. We've got to do better next time. But thanks in the meantime for joining, and hopefully this has been somewhat helpful. It was a very mentally challenging session, not using the arrows and dealing with some pretty difficult troubles. I'd kind of like to spend a bit more time learning from this last mistake, but I really do have to get going. So until next time, take care. We'll see you soon. Cheers.